If Larry Jewell is the father of AA in Texas, then we can appropriately say that Clarence Snyder is the grandfather of AA in Texas. And so, without any more remarks, I give you Clarence, the grandfather of AA in Texas.
Good morning. I am Clarence Snyder. I live in St. Petersburg, Florida. Last night I was down at this dance, and I never saw such a jumping bunch of rummies in my life. I've been to AA dances before, but this is the first one I ever went to where everybody gets into the act. Usually they have to pry them out of their seats at most of these things. You people here have been practicing. They had me doing everything from the Watusi to the Charleston last night. I got into that Jones deal and I nearly got killed. Well, I'm certainly glad we can all stay young. I know one thing for sure, I'm a lot younger today than I was 27 years ago. And I had pictures to prove it. You know, first of all, I want to thank Homer and the committee here for inviting me to come here and share this occasion with you. I have been in Texas before to various functions in AA, and I have a lot of friends here, and I've made a lot of new ones this time. I certainly enjoy being over here, and I find some AA in Texas that's unlike any other place. And I mean this is wonderful. I was so impressed when I was over around the Midland area not so long ago. I was over there on my 25th anniversary a couple of years ago, and those people carry their AA books to meetings like you take your prayer book to church. And they use those books, and you better know what you're talking about because they check you by this book. It reminded me of the old days in the Oxford movement. You heard Bill talking about the Oxford movement in that picture yesterday. This is where AA was born. And they had some very peculiar customs in this Oxford movement, and one of them was what they called checking. And I wonder if this wouldn't be a good idea sometime in AA for these people whose stories get better and better as the years go by. You get up and make some kind of a wild statement, and some bird gets up out there and says, "I'll check you on that." And you have to prove it in the light of the four absolutes of honesty, unselfishness, purity, and love. And sometimes this is tough. So you have learned very early in your career there to pretty much know what you're talking about before you open your mouth. It's great stuff. Why, I look over this crew this morning. I was looking at you all last night, all dolled up, and certainly are a grand-looking bunch of people, a fine-looking bunch of rummies. You know, when I look at a crowd like this, it reminds me of one of my favorite rummy stories. I'm not much of a storyteller, so I won't be here doing too much entertaining this morning, but some of you probably have heard this story, but if you have, you're going to hear it again. This was a story that I like about old Jerry, the town drunk. This fellow, no one had ever seen him sober. 30, 40 years he'd been around that town, and he'd been drunk all as long as anyone could remember. Nobody had ever seen him any other way. He was always unkempt. He never had a haircut. He very seldom shaved. He was always dirty. He had patches all over his clothes. Most of the time he had no shoes, and all the time he was drunk. And he was dirty and he stunk. So finally the inevitable happened. Jerry finally turned up his toes and died. So this caused quite a problem in this community. They had to do something about burying Jerry. since he was a character around there, and perhaps a pillar around there, perhaps a horizontal one, they thought they'd have to give him a decent Christian burial. So someone chipped in a suit, someone chipped in a shirt, someone a necktie, a barber shaved him and cleaned him up, an undertaker offered to do the job, and they got him a suitable casket, and then they had to find a preacher to say a few words over his body. And this was a little tough to find, but they finally found one that had a little enough nerve to try it. So he got there, and the service started, and he got up there, and he started stammering around. He just didn't know quite what to say. So finally he says to the folks assembled there, he says, folks, he says, I just don't know what to say about Jerry. At a time like this, you all knew him, and you knew him for what he was. But Jerry's passed on now, he says, and just what to say about him, I just don't know. But he says, I'd like you all to do one thing. I'd like you all to walk up here and take a look at Jerry and see how good he looks since he quit drinking. Well, in listening to all these wonderful speakers we've had here, and this has been a wonderful convention, what do you think? An awful lot has been said here in these last few days. And we've heard talk about miracles, and I think we all are miracles. We've heard talk about, I've heard people say, well, they don't know what makes this work. I'm going to try to show you or tell you what makes this work. I have no doubt in my mind. Before I get through here, I'd like to let you in on that secret. And I hear other things said about this fellowship, and by the time I finish in the next 3 or 4 hours, I hope to settle a few of these problems from my own standpoint at least. I have some very deep convictions about things in AA, and I'd like to share some of them with you today. But on this miracle proposition, as I said before, I think every one of us is a miracle. How can you explain these things? How can I explain my being here? It's impossible that I am here, but I'm here. I will tell you how I got to this fellowship. I was living in Cleveland, Ohio. I was existing in Cleveland, Ohio. I was on the bum. And my wife had given me a number of chances, as we've all had. I had lost several good positions and a couple of jobs, and I was to the point where I was unemployable. And I never realized how unemployable I was till one day I was telling this story to a crowd, and everybody starts to laugh. It's hit them kind of funny, and it never occurred to me. First of all, when I was drinking in a bottle gang. I was not one of these high-bottom drinkers that we hear about. I have nothing against high-bottom drinkers, but I just wasn't in that class. I was paying 7 cents a pint for my booze, and I was buying it in a wallpaper store the last few years that I drank. So the quality of my booze was nothing like the quality I hope my AA is. Anyway, all these jug buddies of mine were on WPA, and I couldn't make it. They wouldn't take me. I wouldn't even let me hold a flag. Now, this is getting right down to the bottom of things. I always had resentments. I still own a resentment toward the Roosevelt family for that. Now, further than that, my wife at the time was the head of an employment agency. She had a great stake in my getting a position or a job or anything, and she couldn't get me placed anywhere. So I would say I was pretty unemployable. So finally, after in the house and out of the house and part of the family and part of some other society, they gave me one more chance. She had a brother who had a truck, a long-distance outfit, and he drove and carried merchandise in this big tractor-trailer outfit from Cleveland to New York. And they had one of those family councils that was peculiar to that family. I was never included, and I was usually the subject. I was the whole agenda, generally. And they were having one of these conferences about me, and they decided that they'd give me one more chance on the provision that I should go to work for this brother-in-law of mine and be his helper on his truck. Well, I'm a fellow who is against work. I always was, and sobriety for 27 some odd years has not changed that either. I don't like blisters on my hands. I'd rather have them other places. And the idea of me learning to drive one of these big outfits, it was quite appalling. But I had to do it. So I had to prove to them that I was not that no-good, drunken so-and-so that they claimed me to be. So I agreed to go with him on a trip to New York and learn to drive this outfit and be his helper. Well, we started off in the fall of the year, just the beginning of winter. I might say right here that everything happens to me in the lousiest of weather and under the worst circumstances. This was no exception. I had no clothes. I had long since sold my clothes to Uncle Phil. I got $3.50 for my 2 suits and my overcoat. So my wardrobe was depleted. I had nothing but the shirt and a little sweater and pants and a hat and shoes and socks, and that was it. So I started off on this trip. My brother-in-law had cleaned up this nice sleeper cab, real nice for me, and I was to sleep up in the back there. There's 2 people can sleep in one of these cabs, as some of you people probably know. One sleeps on the seats, and the other one gets up in the top there and sleeps. My roost was up on the top. Well, we started off. And he drove and he drove and he drove. Now, I hadn't had any drink that day. I had no booze that day at all, and I had been drunk for several years. I was not a periodic drinker. I was a chronic, such as our speaker last night was. Drunk all the time. So I was in pretty foul shape, and I needed a drink very badly. Before I had gone, and I had prepared for this trip, I had saved up some dough. I don't know what I had stolen and converted into money, but I had this money all in dimes, and it was in different pockets, so it wouldn't rattle. And he didn't know I had this. I had $1.20, as I remember. That was my capital. It was enough to get started any place. That was a lot of money for me. So away we went. And he drove and he drove and he drove and he drove all night long. Thought he'd never stop. And I was scared to death, and I had the shakes, I had the sweats, I was shivering, I was frightened. We never stopped till the next morning. We got over in the New York State, and he stopped for breakfast, what he called breakfast. There was one of these roadside places that sold tomato juice and cheese and all that sort of garbage. And he stopped and started taking on a load of that stuff, and I'm supposed to eat that. Well, of course, I couldn't handle anything like that, so my breakfast went too, and he took care of the breakfast for both of us. He gets in that bloody truck, and we go and go and go again. Stopped once in a while for coffee. I thought this guy is never going to pull this thing up to a halt. The next night we get into Albany, New York. I shall never forget Albany, New York. He was exhausted. I hadn't had my hands on his wheel yet, nor had he even shown me how to shift gears yet on this thing. I had had no instruction whatever. I was just sitting there like a goon. So he finally conked out. He had a rest. He says, I'm going to pull up here and I'm going to take a nap for half an hour. Okay, I says, I'm glad you are, because we're in Albany. This is the capital of New York. I want to go down and see the government buildings. Well, that was pretty good. So out I went. I can still remember. It's odd how I don't know how most of these people can remember all details of when they go on one of these blow-by-blows for years. I can't remember too much, but once in a while I get a flashback of something that happened. Something that's rather serious. I ran into this first place, and this was serious. It was way out of my class, and I ran out of that joint and went down the street to a place that was more suitable to a man of my position. And I got in this joint and I found an angel right off the bat. I'll tell you, that old saying, the Lord takes care of fools and drunks, is so true. I got in this place and I started throwing drinks in me, and somebody was paying for these. I don't know who, but somebody did. There was some guy there that was really putting it out. And I threw them in as fast as I could go, and I turned around and beat it. I went down the street and headed back for the truck. Now, not having had anything to drink for all those many hours, why, all of a sudden, this thing hit me like a mallet. The time I got back to the truck, I was not in too good a shape. And this boy was sleeping on the seat, and I stepped on the poor boy's face, and he knew what was wrong then. Church was out. So I got back up into this nice nest of mine and passed out. And that wasn't all that happened up there that night either. So he drove me on to New York. He got me to New York City, took me down they unhooked this trailer somewhere, and he took this tractor down on the waterfront there where a lot of them park them. There's some hotels down there that some of these truck drivers stay at. Then they go out on the town for a day or so till they get a new load to take back. So he took me down to the waterfront and booted me out of that place. He says, "This is the end of the line, you SOB. This is the end. Goodbye." And that was it. Well, I had spent a little of my money in this place in Albany. I still had a little capital. And I was wondering what to do. Here I'm at the beginning of winter. I'm in New York. I don't know but one person in New York City, and this is another sister of his. This didn't sound very promising, but we'll try anything. His sister Virginia lived out in Yonkers, and I thought Virginia owed me some favors. She had been ill one time and came to Cleveland and lived with us for a long time when she was having trouble with her husband. So I thought surely Virginia would look after me and see that I had a suitable roosting place. So I made it out to Yonkers. I remembered where she lived. I went there on my honeymoon. This family I had were a very close-knit family. They did everything together. And when I went on my honeymoon, I went there. I don't know how I got away from the mother-in-law to go on my honeymoon, but anyway, I wound up in Yonkers. So I remember this place. I had good reason to. But when I started up for Virginia's place up on a hill, instead of up the hill, I went down the hill, and I wound up in an Italian place down there, a bunch of Italians. I met some very nice people down there, and they were all living it up. And I joined them with this Dago wine. And of course, you know what happened. By the time I got up to Virginia's house, I was a sight. And I can only remember one thing about that trip to Virginia's house. I can remember rolling around on the floor with her two little kids. And she took a dim view of this. She didn't care much about this kind of acrobatics. So she put me in the back of her car and took me right down where her brother had taken me, and she did the same thing to me that he did. And there I was. Now, I tell you this story for a reason. It has a great bearing on what happened. I can't tell you if it took me to heaven how long I stayed in New York City. But I got a good thing going for me there. I got employment. These fellas who brought their trailers in would bring these tractors over and park them, and then they'd go out on the town for the night or so. And they wanted someone to watch them. I became a watchman. So I slept in these tractors, and they gave me 50 cents a night for doing this. So I had this thing going. I had a nice place to sleep. I stayed out of trouble. I got a half a buck, and I couldn't spend that much money for this mix at 7 cents a pint. I just started to save money. I found out in New York how to eat for nothing. I found out you could get clothes for nothing. I had no rent to pay. I had free rent, and I was getting paid for living in a place. You can't beat this. There's no taxes, no nothing. No old woman to jaw at you. Everything was going good. I wasn't in trouble with anyone. I didn't have to get up and lay around with those birds up in the Bowery. I had a nice thing going. And I'm drunk all the time, of course. I must say, as I said before, I wasn't drinking the best stuff. But I was saving money. I was always frugal. I am a German, and Germans are naturally frugal, and I was one of those. So as time went on, something happened. I'm living there. I'm all unaware of what's taking place. There's a plot going on back here, and I don't know about it. Somebody's always plotting against me. It seems that one day Virginia had her doctor over to see one of the kids. And I don't know anything about this. I don't know what's going on, naturally. And they got to talking, and Virginia and the doctor got talking about drinking. And she told this doctor about this drunken brother-in-law of hers, and what a swell guy he used to be. He used to call me her favorite brother-in-law. What a swell guy he used to be, and what a dirty, drunken bum he is now. And this doctor said to her, well, that's odd. Says, I had a brother-in-law like that, too. But he met some kind of a cult or other, and they have sobered him up, and he spends all his time running around trying to sober up drunks. Eh? And he says further, this brother-in-law of mine knows some doctor in Akron who's in this cult. And he spends all of his time running around sobering up drunks and putting them in hospitals. So this doctor told Virginia that if this brother-in-law of hers ever gets back to Cleveland, or if she ever sees me, she might send me to this doctor down there in Akron. Maybe he can fix me. I don't know this is going on, see? So sometime later, I can't tell you, as I said before, how much later, how long I was there. It might have been a year. I don't know. Because there's bad weather again coming up. So I got back to Cleveland. A fella took me to Erie. I can remember that. And I hooked another ride from Erie into Cleveland. Why a guy always wants to go home, I don't know. I don't know what I expected at home, but I guess we all get that urge to go back to where our roots are. So I went up to the door where I had once lived, or a number of times had lived, and I presented myself in all my splendor, and with my roll of $13 I had in my pocket that I'd saved. So I was flush. I didn't let her know I had $13 though. So I tried to get in the nest, and it didn't work. But she talked to me through the screen door. And she told me about this doctor in Akron and asked me if I'd like to get on and meet him, see if he could do something with me. So what could I lose? I wasn't going to get in the nest anyway. And so I said, yes, I'd like to meet him. So she took me down to the bus station and bought me a one-way ticket to Akron. And she put me on that bus. And there is how I met my sponsor. I shall never forget this. Someone asked me to tell this story. That's why I'm going into such length about it. But it has a bearing on my career, and it has a bearing on yours, incidentally. So I went down to this building in Akron, the address she gave me, the Second National Bank building in Akron, Ohio. You see, there's Robert Smith, Dr. Robert H. Smith. And I got up on that floor where his office was, and he wasn't in yet. And I waited. I was afraid to leave the building. It was cold and miserable outside, and I thought if I ever got out, I probably wouldn't get back. So I continued to pace up and down this hallway in front of his office waiting for him to come in. It seemed to be an awful, awful long time. It seemed like an eternity. And every time I'd walk past that office, I'd look at that sign on his door. It said on there, Dr. Robert Holbrook Smith, rectal surgeon. So often as I looked at that, the thought finally occurred to me that this is certainly a new approach to the problem. Finally, he came in. Well, you know, you'll expect anything. We've tried a lot of things. And why not? So he finally came in, and I was all prepared to tell him about my symptoms. But no go. He ushered me through a couple offices way into his back room, which is something that looked like a laboratory or something. And he sets me down and he starts to tell me about me. I can't figure this guy out. He knows too much about me. I'm getting smart now. And I can't figure anything after he tells me all this stuff. All he's doing is telling me his own story, but he's telling me mine, you know? I got to figure that this guy, there's something wrong here. This guy is something that he shouldn't be. He's not a doctor. He's something else. Or if he is, he's nuts. Or he's a detective or something. He knows too much. At that time, there had been a series of, any of you folks came from Cleveland, which some of you I know have. You'll remember way back there in those days, in the 30s, they had what they called the torso murder mysteries there. They're down in the Skid Row area, down in underneath a bridge over in Broadway, the Kingsbury Run section they called it. They found a bunch of bodies down there that were all cut up. Pieces of them they were. They never found any heads, and they never found any hands. I don't know, somebody had a penchant for saving hands and heads, I guess. But they found these bundles wrapped in newspapers, and there were 7 bodies that they found, as I recall, and they never identified any but one. They found there was a woman there among them. There's one woman. They identified her somehow or other, and she, I don't know, I think they left one hand on her or something. They got some prints from her, and she was a hustler. She had a police record, and that's how they knew who she was. But these men, they never knew who they were. So they theorized that there's some mad butcher. They call him the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. He was either a doctor or a butcher of some kind because he knew anatomy, and they said that his technique was good. He knew how to cut people up. He was either a surgeon or a butcher. And this is very interesting to some people. And when this doctor's telling me all these things about myself, I figured he'd been following me around a long time, see? So things are starting to gel now. So I figured the next thing he wants to do is put me out in a laughing academy out here in a little town outside of Akron. He's going to lock me up where people can't get at me, he said. No one can get at you. You'll be isolated. You'll be alone. I didn't want to be isolated with this bird. I figured he was a mad butcher. He'd been following me, and I'm the next one. So I waited my chance, and I ran out of the place and got away from him. I wasn't quite ready to go yet, you know. But I couldn't forget this fellow. I got back with my bottle gang, one of them. And I remember they came along. We got on one of our favorite subjects, and if I'm not mistaken, I was probably the one that started this subject. We discussed weighty problems in the jungles, you know. So we got on this problem of quitting drinking. So I told him that I was going to quit drinking. I think this is the last nail that I got put into my coffin. You know, we all need so many nails driven into it before we're ready for this, you know. Before we're ready to really take a stand to quit and change ourselves. And this one loudmouth rummy, he's sitting there about half gassed, as we all were. And I said something about quitting drinking. He said, you quit drinking, you'll never quit drinking. He said, you don't have guts enough to quit drinking. He says, look at you. Just look at you. This guy's drunk as I am, you know. He says, to quit drinking, he says, here's a philosopher, he says, takes determination. He says, and to have determination, you have to have a chin. He said, look at you. He says, you got a chin like Andy Gump. He said, you got no guts, you'll never quit. Those are his words, as close as I can remember them. They seared my soul. The last little bit of pride I ever had left in me, he just knocked all to pieces. He trampled on it. And I had to do something. I says, I'll show you I'll quit drinking. I know a doctor in Akron who's going to fix me. He said, nobody will fix you. You're no damn good. He said, I'll show you. So off I went. I got a hold of someone's phone. I don't know who to this day, because I know we had no phones where we were. We just were not paying those kind of bills. And we had no connections. But whoever's phone it was, they really got something out of that deal, because Doc told me how many times I called him. I only remember calling him once. And he told me to meet him in Akron City Hospital the next day, and he'd look after me. So I made my way to Akron. I got out to this city hospital, and it was cold, a blizzard in February. And I didn't have the car fare. I couldn't get anything off the stem. I had to walk out here. And it's a long ways, and everything in Akron is uphill. At the time I got to Akron, I was just about spent. I weighed 130 pounds. I had no clothes. I had no overcoat, and I was sweating when I got there, just running off of me in the zero weather, if you can picture this deal. I only remember going into this hospital corridor, the lobby, and everything went black. I just passed out. I conked out and landed on the floor. The next thing I remember was a lot of activity. There were all kinds of people. There seemed to be 1 million people around in that room. I was in a room upstairs, and they were giving me a bath. Why, I don't know. They had a custom about this thing in hospitals. It's routine, I guess. And they were giving me a bath, and everybody seemed to have a hand in this activity. The spectators and everybody. So they put me in this bed, and the next thing I know, one of these nice starchy nurses comes along. She has a tray. She says, Mr. Snyder. I hadn't been called Mr. for a long time. She says, Mr. Snyder, we have some medicine for you. She says, you drink this medicine here, then you can wash it down with this nice big hooker of whiskey. And I look at that stuff, and I look at that whiskey. I know what she's trying to feed me. She's trying to give me some of that formaldehyde. It tastes like the bottom of a bird cage. And this whiskey bit, here I went down there to quit drinking, and they're forcing whiskey on me already. So I cussed her out about this. I told her, I got on my muscle about this. I came down here to quit drinking, not to resume drinking. Big stuff. Boy, I sure killed myself on that deal. I lay in that hospital for a week. And remember, when you're sober, when you're drunk for a couple of years, hand running without any interruptions, and you quit drinking like that, brother, you're in trouble. And I was. As I said before, I weighed 130 pounds. I don't know when I'd eaten. I was really sick. So I couldn't eat the whole week I was in that hospital. These fellas came in to see me. Every day these men came in. There were 18 fellas came to visit me in that Akron City Hospital. I know this because they all signed a little sheet of paper that was at the head of my bed. This was a custom that they had. Some of them came back 2 or 3 times. There was always someone in there talking to me. I didn't know what they were talking about. They were telling me the stories of their life. I know this. And what happened to them through booze. And they all told me one thing. They all told me they had the answer to my problem. They didn't tell me what this answer was. Now, The last day I was in this place, Paul Stanley came in. Paul's wife, Hildreth, was a reader in the Christian Science Church. Paul had been a Catholic one time, and they either run him out or he fell out or something, but he was no longer. And he'd gotten mixed up in this Oxford movement, and he got mixed up with this Christian Science deal, and he'd been reading Emmett Fox, and he had gotten into spiritualism, and he was really well equipped to talk to a drunk like me. So he came in that morning when I was having my breakfast, the last day I was in his hospital, after I'd been there a week. And I remember I hadn't eaten yet. I couldn't eat. The first day I remember this, the thing that killed me, the first day I was in his hospital, they brought me up corned beef and cabbage for lunch. Of all the stuff, you know? I can't eat it now. So Paul helped me out. He ate my breakfast that morning. Paul was still talking to me at noon, and he got my lunch. I did get my dessert out of it. I can remember it. I got the dessert out of this thing. They had a peach in a dish. This is what I got for my lunch. About 4 o'clock or so, and 5 o'clock in the afternoon, late in the afternoon, Doc came in. He was in there every day, once or twice. He came in this day. Any of you folks who knew Doc Smith know he's a tall, angular fellow, and he had eyes he could look right through you, really. And he had fingers this long. And Doc sat on the foot of my bed, and he looked at me for a couple of minutes. Then he finally says to me, "Well, young fella," he says, "what do you think of all this?" I said, "Well, I think this is wonderful. All these fellas coming in to visit me, they don't know me from a bale of hay. I don't get it. I don't get it." I says, "They all tell me that they have the answer to my problem, but none of them tell me what the answer is. What goes? What do I have to do? What are you going to do to me now?" He says, "Well," I remember this. He says, "We don't know about you. We're not too sure about you. We don't know whether or not you're ready yet. I don't have a home. I don't have a friend in the world. I don't have a dime. I don't know where I'm going when I get out of there. I weigh 130 pounds. I haven't eaten yet. And you don't know if I'm ready." I shall never forget this. He says, I says, "Ready? What do I have to do to be ready?" He says, "Well," he says, "we've had no luck with you young fellas. Everyone we've ever had is young like you is a nut. He's nuts, crazy, psychopaths or something he called them." Well, he said, "We don't know." I had to convince this man that I was ready for this and wanted this in the worst way. Remember the 5th chapter of our book? It says, if you want what we have, and if you're willing to go to any lengths to get it, you are now ready to take certain steps. This is where this came from. I had to be completely ready. I had to be at the end of my line. And I had to know it. I had to admit it. Admit I was powerless. He made me do this. I finally got the idea across to him, apparently, because he decided to go along with me. He says, "Okay." He says, "I'll give you the answer to this thing." So I thought, well, here it comes now. All these other fellas told me that they all had the answer. Now he's going to give it to me. So he looks at me for a couple of minutes, and he sticks his big bony finger out at me. And he says, "Young fella," he says, "do you believe in God?" Wow. Well, a fella that read that sign on the door and all these other things going on, I was ready for anything, but not this. I still, in my collection of things, have a thing I got from a mission that I stayed at once in a while in New York. I got some clothes out of them one time. They make you sing for everything there, but they will pay off. And I have a little pamphlet from that mission among my collections that I got some years after I was sober up. I went back and I had to visit this place. And I never liked this kind of activity. I stayed away from them as well as I could, except under dire necessity. I'd go in sometimes. I found out how to get along pretty well without them, but they settled the clothing situation for me. I had a place to live in New York, as I told you, and I found out how to eat. You know, I ought to tell some of you birds how this eating business works in New York. I have only told this once or twice in my life. I'll let you in on this deal. But in New York, everybody's nuts. Without exception. This is the silliest town in the world. Everybody's in a hurry. And where they're going, they don't know themselves, but they're in a hurry to get there and back. You go out there sometime and watch them at noontime when they're pouring out of those offices and going to lunch. This is really a treat to watch them, but get out of the way, you get killed. Just get off that curbstone and watch them go. Well, I found out that a lot of these monkeys run down to the automat. They're too busy to go sit down somewhere and eat, so they run to the automat and they buy this and that for a nickel, a dime, or a quarter. It was mostly 10 cents in those days. They'd get anything. They'd get a sandwich or a bowl of soup and chili and all this stuff. They'd just put their money in and take it. And a lot of these monkeys won't even sit down to eat it. They stand up. They got things they can stand up and they talk to each other, and they eat while they're talking. They don't even know what they're eating. Or if they are. They're real busy people. And I learned that this was a good place to go. Without any money. All you do, you sidle up alongside of one of these guys, and he's busy talking to this other ape over here, and you start eating off his plate. Well, the big trick, the best thing you can do is get caught. Really. It's a funny thing about people. When you're hungry, they won't belch you. So that's the first inclination they have. They want to belch you, but they change their mind. They've come back to do it, see, but they never did. The guy just gets so frustrated, he says, "The hell with it," and walks away and leaves the whole thing. He don't like my dirty, crummy paws on his grub. Well, this is the way you eat for free. That's how I saved this money. Well, anyway, this thing of Doc giving me this business in the hospital. I've got to get back to this again. I'm still in the hospital. Doc says to me, he says, "Do you believe in God?" And I thought about all this mission experience and all this stuff back there, and I don't want this deal at all. So the sensible thing for a rummy to do is to start evading it, you know. It's the only thing you can do. So I said, "Well, what does that have to do with it?" I'm very disappointed. He says, "Young fella, that has everything to do with it. Do you or don't you?" I'm in a barrel. Here I am, 7 days in a hospital under obligation to these fellas, and I'm in with a bunch of religious nuts. So I'm trying to find a way out of this. He says, "Well, do you or don't you?" Well, I said, "Well, I guess I do." He says, "There's no guessing about it. You do or you don't." This is this soft touch, this soft approach to the spiritual foundation of AA. I had to tell this man that I believed in God. So I finally says, "Well, yes, I do believe in God." He says, "That's fine." He says, "Now we can get someplace." He says, "Get out of that bed. Get down on your knees." I looked at this guy. He said, "Get going." He says, "We're going to pray." I says, "Who's going to pray?" He says, "We're going to pray." I says, "I don't know anything about praying." He says, "I don't suppose you do. So for this time, I will pray, and you can repeat after me what I say, and that'll do for now." So he got me down on my bones there, and he uttered a prayer. I can't tell you what he said. I couldn't tell you this. And I repeated this, it didn't kill me. It's evidence I'm still here. I felt awful silly, foolish, embarrassed, and I don't know, I just felt lost. But I did it. After we finished and concluded this prayer, he took me by the hand. He says, "Young fella, you're going to be all right. You'll be okay." So that evening he carried me to a meeting. This meeting of the Oxford movement in Akron, Ohio. Now I tell this long story, how I came to AA when there was no AA. It was not known as AA, there was no book, there was no literature, there was no New York, there was no office, there was no nothing. There were a few people meeting with the Oxford group in Akron, and Bill was, as you saw in that picture yesterday, he was attending Oxford group meetings after having been introduced to the Oxford group by Ebby Thatcher. And this was what we had. I had to go to Akron to my meetings. I went back to Cleveland, and I went back and forth. I tried to find work in Cleveland where I could sustain myself. And eventually I got a job. I figured the best way to do is I needed transportation. So, I went to work for a Ford dealer selling cars where I could get a free automobile. I didn't know anything about selling cars, but this guy had known me years ago, and he took me on. He gave me $20 a week, drawing account I had. I got a room in a rooming house, a boarding house. I paid $10 a week for room and board. I had to buy clothes, I had to buy gas for this car, I had to entertain people on that other $10. I lived high. So that was my beginning in this thing. I attended these Oxford group meetings every Wednesday night. I was down there every weekend to be with these people. Most of the people in the Oxford movement were not alcoholics. These people in the Oxford group had firm convictions that they could fix anybody. So they took on the alcoholics, and that's where they made their mistake. I went to Oxford group meetings for 15 months. And eventually we had about a dozen members going from Cleveland. It took me 7 months to get my first alcoholic to lie still long enough so I could tie him up and get him down there. And this was an experience to me that I shall never, never forget. I never figured I'd ever be a real member of this fellowship until I had got a baby in it, till I'd sponsored someone. And I'll tell you folks, I snatched drunks off of stools, I went into hobo jungles, I went into saloons, and I got thrown out of saloons, I got beat up. Everything happened to me. The first thing I went, of course, was back to these jugheads whom I had drank with. And I tried to straighten them up. I told them they should be like me. And they looked at me and they didn't want to be like me. They all thought I'm nuts. First guy I ever got was a fella. He was way over in the other end of town in a Polish neighborhood. There was a depression on at this time. Remember this. There were no jobs. The jobs didn't come along till the war broke out. This was way back in 1938. I went over in this section as a foreign section, and a bunch of these guys had taken over a house which had been abandoned. They were living in this house. They just moved in as squatters, that's all. There must have been 25 or 30 rummies living in this house. Not living, existing. No furniture in the house, but they were in there. And this fella I'd heard about, this Bill Hess, he'd been an auditor for the Sherwin-Williams Paint Company for many years, and they'd fired him for boozing. He had a family of 5 kids. I'd heard from him about this fella, and every lead I ever found I'd chased. And I chased way over to see this guy, and I found him. He was unconscious when I got there. I got him slapped around enough till he could talk, or at least know I was there. And I talked to Bill and asked him if he would like to really get over this stuff and really quit for good. He says, I would, you know. So I asked him a foolish question number 4. do you have any dough? You know, dough. If you had any dough, you think he'd be there? This is the logic of a rummy. He said that his mother could get up some money, but she lived in a farm 55 miles from Cleveland, out in Madison, Ohio. This didn't stop me, kid. I go out to see Mother. He forgot to tell me his mother was Polish and didn't speak English. He forgot this. I drove out there, and I left this car at the main road. I had to walk about 1.5 miles down a lane to get to this house where she was. And I remember when this was, and how that I know it was 7 months, is that I came in this thing in February, and when I got out there it was September because it was squirrel hunting season. I remember this. And that comes in September in Ohio. And the reason this impressed me, when I was walking up this long lane, guns were going off everywhere. It sounded like the Battle of the Marne. And I got about halfway down this lane, probably 1 mile up this lane, and what do I come across but a horse? Here's a horse laying there, and he has a hole in him this big, which means that somebody shot this horse with a shotgun at very close range. And when I considered that this bunch of rum pots are running around there hunting and hunting squirrels, and they can't tell a squirrel from a horse, I'm in trouble. But I finally got to the house, and I found this woman couldn't speak one word of English, and I only knew 2 words of Polish. Jak si masz and dobrze. This is all I know in Polish. So she had a little kid there, one of the grandsons, and through this kid, as an interpreter, I talked this old gal out of $50. She went in and cut a lump out of the mattress and gave me this money, and I went back to Cleveland. I went and gathered up Bill. I threw him in the back of this car, and away we went to Akron. I got on the outskirts and called Doc, and he met me at the hospital, and this was my first baby in AA. And this is after talking to scores and probably hundreds of them. After that, they came easier. It started to happen, and I guess I wasn't ready. I guess I didn't have a message to carry up to that time. It was awfully difficult to sell an idea of this. I often think of this promotion and attraction blurb that I hear about. If we'd waited somebody to be attracted to this, we wouldn't have any AA. This was all promotion. And don't let anybody kid you, it still is. So we have an idea here we have to put across. And this was tough to sell this idea because there was no history behind this. There was nothing. But these fellas started to fall in line. And eventually we had a dozen, and eventually we had to break away from the Oxford movement. And when Cleveland broke away from the Oxford movement, that was in May of 1939. That was the first group that started as Alcoholics Anonymous. These New York and Akron were Oxford group movements, and Akron stayed in the Oxford group for over a year after we started. And about the time we started, the Oxford group kicked those guys out in New York. They'd had enough of rummies in the Calvary House. They told them this, a classic statement the Oxford group people told Bill Wilson and his cohorts, his pals. It says, we want no more to do with alcoholics, dipsomaniacs, drug addicts, or pickpockets. So that took care of us. So that's when Bill moved down to the 24th Street Clubhouse and started operations down there. We had to break away from the Oxford movement to give a universality to this. And that's how we began. This is a part of the story that wasn't in the picture yesterday. Now, these are miracles. About this time, back sometime later on, Elric Davis, he got a hold of him as a rummy. I took him to some meetings. I took him down to Akron, had him talk to some people. He wrote a series of articles that appeared in the Cleveland Plain Dealer. Another writer followed up with 3 or 4 days of writing after that. Eldricks took a week. We had about 2 weeks of publicity in the Cleveland Plain Dealer. Inquiries were coming from all over the country, not just Cleveland. They were coming from everywhere. People in Cleveland area were cutting out these things and sending them to Aunt Kate out here in Omaha and such places. This is a time a little later on that the publisher of the Cleveland Press, Louis Seltzer, called me one day, and he told me about Larry Jewell. He said, there's a chap, Larry Jewell, I haven't seen him in a long time. He's down on the Skid Row someplace in Cleveland. He says, this man is worth salvaging. He says, if you can find him, he says, I'll stand whatever hospitalization and whatever cost it is, I'll stand. So I sent a couple of the boys down to the Skid Row areas, and they dug Larry out. And I mean they dug him out. Larry, I don't think, weighed 90 pounds, if I remember. He was more dead than alive. He had a collapsed lung. He had a tube sticking out of his side here that was draining. He was drunk. He was living down there, and it was awful weather. He had the same luck I had. And the boys gathered him up, and we all took him out to Post Shaker Sanitarium, where we were sobering up a lot of our drunks. We had a deal worked out with Mr. and Mrs. Post. I took him up there, and Mrs. Post took one look at him, and she says, no, not him. We don't want that fella. I says, well, why? We don't want him in this place at all. I says, you got to take them all. That's our arrangement. I says, you take him or you don't get any more. So why don't you want to take him? Well, in Larry's meanderings around, among his marriages, he had married one of her nieces at one time. And she didn't like Larry. He wasn't in good standing with the family. But she had to take him, so she finally did. And we didn't know for some time whether Larry was going to live. He was that bad. But he did, fortunately for a lot of us. And when he was ready to leave there, he never went to a meeting in Cleveland. Larry didn't. He never left the sanitarium till he was ready to move on. And Louis Seltzer and some of his friends at the Chamber of Commerce who had money made up a purse for Larry. They gave him an opportunity of going any place he wanted. That climate in Cleveland was not good for a man in his condition. So he could have gone any place. He could have gone to Arizona, California, Florida, any place. But he chose Houston for some reason of his own. And when he came down here, that's what he did. He wrote a series of articles. He got a job with the Houston Press through this effort. And that's how he got started here. This is the story of Larry. I can tell you so many stories of rummies. I just love to talk about some of these old rummies we used to have. I hear so many things about sponsoring people. Don't ever let a man sponsor a woman. If it hadn't been for man sponsoring women, you wouldn't have any women. I sponsored all the first women that come in this fellowship in Cleveland. I remember one gal, I made the jug with her twice while I'm sponsoring her. I never told this story at a meeting but once. I told it a couple of weeks ago over at Camp Monroe. This girl had, without a question of doubt, now I've met a lot of people. You must know that in over 27 years of this activity, and I've always been active in it, I have met an awful lot of people, an awful lot of rummies. And I've seen some degradation in my life, in my time, among these people. But I have never seen anyone to equal this girl's status. This gal's name was Catherine. She was an Irish girl. She had been educated abroad. She came from a very wealthy family. But she broke her family. Lots of things happened. I'm not going to tell you her story, only part of it here. A social worker got me after this Catherine as a result of some of these articles that came out. And this social worker, this Miss Mooney, she just bugged me to death about this Catherine. And this Catherine was around my neck all the time, and she was absolutely the cruddiest individual I had ever run into in my life. And she was Irish, she was profane, she was loud, and she stunk, and she was dirty, and she was everything that a person shouldn't be. So Catherine had a long record in the workhouse. She was more at home in the county workhouse than she was anyplace else. Catherine, I tried my best to do something with her. Catherine was living with some Italian people in a very, very ninth-class neighborhood, a real slum area. And these Italians were bootleggers, and Catherine was doing a little of everything. So this was her life. So I run into Catherine one day on the street. It was the first time I got in a little trouble with Catherine. She's on the street and she's drunk. So I try to get her off the street and get her home so she won't get picked up and get jugged again. So I take her down the street and I'm doing all right. Till she all of a sudden gets an idea in this lard head of hers that she wants something to eat. Well, I know this is a mistake. She can't eat. I know this much. But she thinks differently. So I try to get her into one of those one-arm joints, with the porcelain tables. She don't go for this. She's had better raising than this. She wants tablecloths. So I made a fearful mistake. I took her into a nice restaurant. There's a restaurant at 79th and Euclid where a lot of these people who are in business around there go for their noon lunch. It's got carpets on the floor, tablecloths, waiters with tuxedos. It's a spaghetti joint. So Catherine goes in there, and she's loud, she's profane, and she stinks. And I'm with her. I'm trying to hide. So we get set down, and she's disturbing everyone. It doesn't take just to walk through a place, and it's a shambles. It's a disaster area with her. So we sit down, and she has trouble with the waiter. And he says something and takes umbrage with some of her activities, and she talks to him about his ancestors. Has a few choice remarks. And he leaves, and he comes back after a while, and he takes the order, and she had a few more words with him. The order eventually comes, and you know how she ordered spaghetti, incidentally. And she's about as equipped to handle spaghetti as I am to go to the moon right now. So Catherine has spaghetti in her hair, down here, every place but in her mouth. Most of it's flopping right back into the plate. And I'm sitting there, and all these people are they're very attentive to all the people around. So the head waiter comes back. He don't like Catherine's attitude toward the customers. And he tells her a few things, and he also tells her that if she doesn't quiet down, she's going to have to leave. She don't like this. So she told him something, and he took a look at her and he left. A few minutes he's back. He has another idea in his mind for Catherine. Catherine don't agree with his idea. So what does she do but pick up this plate of spaghetti and drape it all over him? Well, it isn't, I don't suppose, 3 minutes till the wagon's there. And guess who's in the wagon with Catherine? I hadn't been pinched for a long time, and sober it never happened. But it has now. So I get down to that can, and I say, I can explain it. Oh, sure. I don't belong here. I'm not... Yeah, I know. See? I don't get a chance. I says, call Ed Crowley. He's a probation officer. He'll tell you... Yeah, we'll call Ed. He knows you, I'm sure. Eventually, some guy down there did call Ed Crowley after a lot of my pleading. And Ed thought this was the greatest thing that ever happened since the floating of the ark. He got a big kick out of this. He got me out, but they kept Catherine. It wasn't but a few weeks later, I'm going down Euclid Avenue again. Same bloomin' neighborhood. I should stay out of there. I'm at 82nd and Euclid. Any of you people in Cleveland know this area. There's a Jewish temple on one side and a Unitarian church on the other. There's a traffic light there. It's a busy corner. And this is high noon again. Should stay away from there at noontime. This is Catherine's territory. Here comes Catherine again. Drunk as usual, and just as dirty and just as loud. So I said, Catherine, let's go home. No food today. We don't eat. So she agreed. So we start going home, and we got to this traffic light, and we're going to go across the street. But Catherine, it just occurred to her that she got the call of nature. I have Catherine by the hand, but she squats right there. Well, all these people who had been in the restaurant the other day are going back and forth. They look at Catherine, and she looks at them, and she has a few choice words for them. They look at me, and I hold her hand. Well, it isn't very long to the wagons. They're again. Poor old Ed had to come again. They had a different crew on that day, and I had to go through the same blooming thing I went through the time before. So I finally said to Ed, I called Mooney. I says, Miss Mooney, I says, this is getting monotonous, if not interesting. We got to do something with Catherine. So we framed Catherine. They says, what do you think you should do? I says, Catherine should be put away for a long, long time. So we arranged that Catherine should be picked up and put in the workhouse for a year. She got a year and a day. And, of course, I dare not go out and see Catherine because she knew I had a hand in this deal. This is a violation of a person's civil rights, I think. Well, anyway, she's out there in the woman's workhouse, which is about 20 miles out of Cleveland. And I had to wait till she sent for me. If I'd gone out, she'd have killed me. So eventually she told the matron she wanted to see me. So I went to the dime store and I bought her some cosmetics. And I bought her some gumdrops. And I bought her some cigarettes. I must have spent at least 50, 60 cents on her. I blew it. I'm the last of the big spenders. And I took this bag full of stuff and went out to the workhouse. Well, when I got out there, this workhouse really experienced something that never happened before. The air turned blue all around this thing, smoke coming out of it. This was Catherine directing her attention to me. She was locked up. She couldn't get at me, which was very fortunate. So she finally ran down. I let her talk, and we rave and rant and cuss and swear and kick and holler and scream till she run down. And then I offered her my peace offering. So I went out to see Catherine twice a week for that whole year. I always took her some gumdrops and cigarettes and some stink water from the dime store. These were valuable to her. They meant something to her. But she wanted to get out. We wouldn't let her out. We could have got her out any time. I told Miss Mooney and Ed Crawley we should leave her there and let her accomplish one thing in her life. Let her serve this sentence, the whole thing. Well, that's a good thing because it probably took them 6 or 8 months to clean that girl up. I mean it. She had everything from dandruff to fallen arches. She had everything. And they didn't have those quick recovery things for these diseases in those days either, you know. So they had quite a time where they had a hospital out there, and they took care of her. There's a remarkable story about Catherine. She's one of the very first gals in AA, one of the first. She came out of there a year later, and Miss Mooney got her a job on one of the city beaches as a lifeguard. She could swim like a fish. She learned this in these private schools she'd attended years ago. She wasn't an old girl either, but she was so thin. She had to stand up twice to throw a shadow. She was so emaciated when she came in. She was only, I don't think Catherine was over about 35 years old. And she was awful thin, just bones. So Mooney got her a job. She'd fattened up a little bit in this year. She started looking human by the time she got out of there. Looked like something that would be acceptable at least. She learned how to talk without resorting to the father every time she opened her mouth. So she worked on this beach till fall. So the beach is closed, and Mooney got her a job in a hotel as a room clerk, as a floor clerk in Sadler Hotel in Cleveland. She worked on that job. She went to school and took a refresher course in typing and shorthand. She left the hotel and got a job as a stenographer in an office. She worked her way up into a private secretary job. She saved her money. Mooney had moved her out of this fearful neighborhood. Of course, when she came out, she put her in a neighborhood out with some Lithuanian people, way out by Euclid Beach Park. These people knew nothing about alcohol, or they knew nothing about Catherine. I took Catherine to a meeting, and the women wouldn't allow her in. They wouldn't accept her. The non-AA women, the wives, we were meeting in homes, and they wouldn't accept Catherine. So I couldn't take her to meetings. I took her to picnics and parties we had where we had a lot of people, and she didn't have any identity, but I couldn't take her to a meeting. I took her to an Akron meeting once, and she got pretty much the same short trip down there. So Catherine went back to her church. She was a Catholic girl. She'd been out of her church for a long time. She went back to church, and she got interested in young people's affairs. She's very good at this, very good with kids. And this was her hobby from then on. She spent a lot of time with young people. Catherine saved her money. She went in the real estate business. She became a wealthy woman. She's living in Miami today. She's as big as a tub. She never got married. Terrific story. I can tell you stories about people, these miracles that happen here, from now till the cows come home. They're all miracles to me. You and I are all miracles. Why is it this? I often ask myself this question. Why this thing of alcoholism is so old? It's as old as time itself. There's records of alcoholism in the Bible. In ancient history and mythology, you hear about it. Old Noah, you read the account of Noah, he almost fell off the ark. He got so potted. You know, that's a long time ago to start getting drunk. And all this time, people have tried to do something about alcoholism. There's been all kinds of things: psychiatry, psychology, medicine, religion, threats, jails. Everything has been tried. Everything's been tried on you and I. But until now, till the last few years, just a few thousand of us here have this privilege. Why is this? Why are you chosen for this? Why am I chosen? It's certainly not because we deserve it. By the grace of God, we're chosen for this great miracle. What we do with this is very important. We have a great responsibility here. I've always felt this way. I've always had very deep convictions about this thing. What happened to me has so impressed me that this has always been the first thing in my life, above everything. I've had chances to go professional in AA. Believe me, I have. I've never done it. I'm still an amateur. And as such, I reserve the right to criticize whomever I please. It is a professional. I like this. This is an avocation to me, and it's most important to me. Why does this plan work? What is alcoholism? I hear people say in meetings they don't know what alcoholism is. We heard quite a dissertation last night on alcoholism, the technical aspects of it. What is it? Who is an alcoholic? Let's talk about an alcoholic. Who is an alcoholic? I'll tell you one thing about an alcoholic. Everybody can't be an alcoholic. Believe me. The privilege of being an alcoholic is reserved for a chosen few. You have to have certain characteristics and certain things within you or you'll never make it. You'll never be a rummy. There's a lot of people can drink an awful lot of whiskey and a lot of booze, but they can never be one of us. They just ain't made right. An alcoholic has certain definite characteristics, and you can pick them out. I got a kick out of the other day. Where's this little girl that was talking the other day? We were at a press conference the other day. How about this? You remember this? The other morning we had a press conference here where we were talking to some of the reporters and so forth. I says to this little gal, I says, look at that bird over there. He's really had a rough night. That guy should be one of us. Say, one of the reporters. And she looks over and this guy sees us. Look at him over, see. So right away, we've probably all been in this position. When I'm ready to leave, he stops me as I'm going out. He says, what did you have to tell her for? She tells me that later on, he was here late in the afternoon, sloughing around the bar. I think he met us, and I think he'll probably be one of us soon. He's been touched. This guy, that he's hopeless now, he's going to get caught. He's one of us, but he hasn't found it out yet. He will. You don't even have to smell him to know him. I couldn't smell that guy clear across that room, but I know he's a rummy. I'll walk down the street. There'll be 75 people walking in front of me. There'll be a panhandler down here, a rummy on the stem, a real 24-karat rummy, not just an ordinary drunk, a rummy. These 75 people will walk right past this guy, and he'll walk right up and hit me. Always. It never fails. Why does he do this? He knows me. He knows me. I know him. I see him. And I know that I'm going to get it. I know I'm going to get belted. Why is this? We're all the same in this respect. We have these same characteristics. I don't say that some of these earth people don't have some of these characteristics, but they don't have them all. There's an alcoholic. I've never seen an alcoholic worthy of the name who was not a high-strung individual. I've never met one who did not have a wealth of imagination. They are very sensitive souls. They're always going around looking for someone to hurt their feelings. Yeah. They're very lovable people, really they are. They're like kids, very immature in a lot of ways. They're the biggest liars that ever wore shoes. They'd rather lie when the truth would serve them better. They lie for practice. They got to keep up with things. They'll steal a red-hot stove. I would. If I had to have the wherewithal to get that booze, nothing. I used to come home, even when I had money, before I lost all the jobs and was unemployable, I'd come home with some of the oddest trinkets in my pockets that I'd pick up here and there. And what in the world earthly use any of this junk was, I'll never tell you, but at the time it seemed like a good idea. There may be something I can convert that into. I'd bring this stuff home. I could tell you some stories about this. It amazes me even, what things I used to pick up along the way. The first meeting I ever went to the Oxford movement in Akron, when they took me there that night, I went into this beautiful home, T. Henry Williams. He was not an alcoholic. The people running the Oxford group were not alcoholics. They had this beautiful home, all the trimmings. They had a grand piano over here. They had oriental rugs. They had nice pictures on the wall. They had a lot of this beautiful bric-a-brac sitting around. And I walked in that place and I scanned it. And I took an inventory of some of the smaller pieces. And I filed this away for possible future reference. I never swiped anything there, but it wasn't that it didn't occur to me. This is just a natural way of living with me. So these alcoholics, they're great people. They do have a lot of imagination. They do have a lot on the ball. They say they're smart. Well, they have to work hard. It's their imagination. They're quick thinkers. They're not deep thinkers. Very seldom do you see an alcoholic who is one of these fellas who's slow to make up his mind about anything. Most of them are cigarette smokers. They smoke. I've watched them around here. They smoke 5 of them going at one time. They don't know it. They are high-strung. They're nervous people. We are people of action. We'll do something. We don't know what the hell we're doing, but we'll do it. There'll be something happening all the time. That's for sure. We never have to sit down and make up our minds about anything. If something comes, it's gone. One of the biggest mistakes that's made, or I would say the biggest mistake that's been made all these years in dealing with alcoholics, all these people of professional mean, they all make the same blooming mistake, and it just bugs me. Every time I hear people talking about educating the public, the hell with the public. You'll never educate the public. You'll never educate the preachers. You'll never educate the doctors. You'll never educate the psychiatrists. You'll never educate any of these earth people, so forget it. Forget it. What we have to do is do something with the alky, and we got our hands full with him. And I'll tell you why you won't educate them. They'll never learn this. If they haven't learned it now, they'll never will. I'll guarantee you. They all have the same trouble. And I say this with a lot of authority. We have a fouled-up mess over in Florida the same way. We have a beautiful system that we could have there, a rehabilitation, and they foul this up the way everybody does. They approach the alcoholic from a sane, sensible, logical position. They expect this knucklehead to respond to logic and common sense. I have had $1 million worth of good, logical, common sense and advice given me before I ever got here, and it never did me any good at all. I just got worse. And the same things happen to every one of us in this room. We'll never straighten up a rummy trying to educate him or trying to give him these fancy 4 or 5-syllable words and tell him what they are. I get these monkeys coming out of Avon Park in Florida. They're all amateur psychiatrists when they come out. They should have sheepskins. I start talking to them about AA, and they start telling me, yeah, they're smarter than I. They're real smart guys. They know I can't pronounce these words. They can, but they can't stay sober. So that's the trouble. That's the tragedy of it. Unless we approach an alcoholic's never going to straighten up till he feels a certain way. It has to be in here. He has to feel. This is an emotional proposition. Until we approach him emotionally, it's never going to work. Why? People say, how much does this guy have to take? He has to take it till he's just so sick of it all and he wants to change so badly he'll do anything. This is what, in essence, it amounts to. People start talking about showing them moving pictures of their liver and their stomach and all this jazz down there at these dry-out joints. What good is this stuff? Every person, every alcoholic, I learned how to work with people because I had to learn, and I was interested in learning, and I had thousands and thousands and thousands of them to work with because there was nobody else to work with them in those days. So I had plenty of guinea pigs to work with. But I found certain things out that are so true, as I have proven them in my own experience. Every person has a soft spot. He has an Achilles heel where you have to find. It might be pride with one person, it might be something else with another. But we have to find this soft spot, and that's where you got to hit him. And we talk to a rummy when he's coming off of a drunk, not when he's in it or going into it. This stuff of talking to a rummy, I heard this in one time in a group. I laughed at this rummy. I was in a group meeting in a club in Orlando one time. I probably shouldn't mention the name of the place, but I did, so what? I was up there. I was traveling through the town, and I just happened to go in, and here's some poor Joe. He'd been up there apparently 2 or 3 weeks before and joined. He joined the group. And something happened. He didn't get his lessons proper or something, or he didn't pay his initiation proper. Anyway, he's drunk. He got taken down with drink. And he's up there, and this guy is really sick. And he's just shaking out of his skin. And one of these pillars of the group, some wise guy up there, he's standing over this poor slob, and he says, "Why didn't you call somebody before you got drunk?" If that isn't the silliest damn thing I ever heard of in my life. So this drunk fixed him up real good. I thought this was a classic. And I just fell out of my chair laughing. It just hit me so that I'll never forget it. This poor guy could hardly talk. I'm not going to try to imitate him, but in essence, this is what he said. He says, "Who am I going to call? All I know is Joe and Mary and Catherine, and they don't put them in a book like that. So score one for anonymity." Boy, I thought I'd flip. Well, the Alkie is a guy that has deep feeling. He's very sensitive. And we heard last night about empathy, this feeling that goes between us. We recognize this. This is so true, what we heard last night about that. You can feel something going between rummies that you don't feel with other people. Really, it's the truth. I know this. I feel this. And we have this. It's not sympathy, it's a different feeling. This is some outfit we have here. It's a doggone outfit any person can ever get into. You have to admit and be a total failure before you ever get here. And then you get here and you brag about it. I went to a sales meeting one time. I shall never forget this. I was working for this Liberty Life, and they call us in every once in a while and on these conventions, and every convention they have some high-powered speaker pimping us up, giving us the old go out and do it for dear old liberty, you know. So they have since fired me, so I can talk about them. They said they retired me. Well, anyway, this one fella, he was really good too. He really had a spiel. And when you get up and spellbind a bunch of these bloomin' insurance men, you're doing quite a job. And this fella had them all wrapped up real good. He was up there talking about success. And he was emphasizing his points. He says, think success, talk success, live success, dream success, eat success. Everything he said, he was pounding on that table about success. Then he says, you never heard of anybody standing up bragging about being a failure, did you? I got up and said, Bud, I got news for you. He never met this bunch. We exchange things here. We exchange experiences. We experience a love for one another that it's unique. You don't find it anyplace else. We have that here. A different spirit, a different feeling than any society I've ever been associated with. I belong to a number of societies and lodges and clubs and veterans groups and what have you, and I've done a lot of church work and everything else. I have never experienced the type of feeling that we have for each other in any of these things, and I've been very much involved in some of these other activities. I think they're good for us to get out and do some of these things and see how these poor ordinary slobs have to live. They have nothing to get along with. We know what's wrong with us, and we help each other find out what to do about it. Other people have a lot of troubles, and the poor suckers, they never find out. They never find out. I pity them. I really do. We are the most fortunate of people. How long have we... Oh, gee, I don't have time to do what I wanted to do, but I got talking too much about these things. We have a program. Why does this? I hear these people say they don't know why this program works. Why don't you know why it works? You sure do know why this program works. This program, to us, is a gift of God. We are presented with something. We are asked to make a surrender and turn our will and our life over to the care of God. The good Lord tells us whatever we ask, believing we shall receive. Ask believing, it says, we shall receive. It also says something about what we have to do about things. Our program, I haven't heard this 12 steps read here this week. I don't care if you have to sit here till 3 o'clock. I'm going to do it. If you don't want to sit here, there's plenty of room to get out. But I hope you stay. But we don't have really any place to go but to go to lunch, and we've missed a lot of lunches in our time. I didn't come down all these miles just to say Merry Christmas or hello, you know. Well, anyway, let's talk about these steps. I'll tell you a few things about them as I understand them, because I didn't have these when I came to AA. There were no steps when I came in. These hadn't been written. They were written when the book was written. It's a program for us. And these steps are 12. They're divided in 4 phases. There are 4 phases to our 12 steps. Listen very carefully to this. Our first step is our step of admission. We have to admit there's something wrong with us, or else there's nothing to change. So we admit we are powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. This was not hard for me to do. I don't understand people who can't admit this if they're ready for this. Our next phase is our phase of submission. There's admission and submission. Here is where we submit our will and our lives to the care of God. Here's where He takes away these things. Listen to these steps. Every step in this program means something and does something for us and requires us to do something. Remember this. We are required to do something. People say, oh, you don't have to do anything. There are no musts in AA. But don't you ever believe it. If you want to be sober, there's a lot of musts in AA. And the next time a guy tells you that, you cork him. Because he's killing you. There are a lot of musts in AA if you're in AA. I don't know what some people consider AA, but AA to me is what this program calls for. Anything else is BB or ZZ. This is AA. Now, this submission, it says we made a decision. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God. Boy, that's something for a rummy to do. And ask a rummy to make a decision in the first place is asking an awful lot. To ask some guy coming in here to make a decision to turn his will and his life over to some ethereal creature out here in the blue yonder of whom he has very little acquaintanceship and is probably scared to death of. This is asking a lot. And we're starting to separate the men from the boys right now. If this fella doesn't come up to what it requires in that 5th chapter where it says, if you want what we have and are willing to go to any lengths to get it, he's out of business right now in that 2nd step. He can make all admittances he wants, but if he doesn't take that 2nd step, he's dead right now. So he's going to have to be hurting or he won't do it. And if he won't do it, you've got nothing for him till he's ready to do it. So, okay. We came to believe that power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Let's not quibble about what this power is. Its power is God. What else and who else? God. Step 3 says we made a decision to turn our will and our life over to the care of God. This is making that decision. This is tough. Then we get down here, we made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Now here's a step that really gets people. They don't do this. And they don't do it. If they do, half of them don't do it properly. You know how to do this? You have to do it with someone else. Because I don't know of any rummy worthy of the name coming in here who has the capacity to make a searching and fearless moral inventory of himself. He's too damn big a liar for this. And he's been justifying himself too long. An alcoholic can justify himself in anything. So the next step tells you why. It says in this next step, we admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. See, someone's bitten at our elbow helping us, making suggestions there, and we admitted to him. So this is how we take that 4th step. Step 6, it says we were entirely ready, not a little bit ready or going to get ready or a little, we're entirely ready. An alcoholic does everything entirely. He's an extremist. Never does anything by halfway measures. It's whole hog or nothing with a rummy. When a rummy works, he works hard, and he drinks, he makes a career out of it. So this is the same thing in this sobering up deal. So he's entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. Remember that. Read that step very carefully when you go home tonight. We're entirely ready to have God remove. He can't remove himself. And he's going to remove all of them, it says. And it says, we humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. We humbly asked him. Here's where we submit ourselves to our power, to our God. We put ourselves in his hands, without reservation, mental reservation or otherwise. We go the whole way. This is the only way we're ever going to start to live. Yes, some people can stay sober for some time. Some people will eventually get drunk if they don't do this. Some people will miss an awful lot if they don't get drunk. This is the way to a happy life that I'm talking about. Get the best of everything. We deserve it. We've had a lot of misery all our lives. Let's have it. That's the submission. Now, the next steps are the steps of restitution. It says here, we made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing. We became willing to make amends to them all. That attitude of willingness is important. It says, we made direct amends wherever possible, except when to do so would injure them or others. We made these demands. So there's a step we should take with the counsel of some knowledgeable and experienced people, because we're very apt to louse that one up real good if we don't have proper direction with it. That's very important to take that restitution phase with your sponsor or someone who is knowledgeable in these things. All right, we've had 9 steps now, and we've gone through them, right? Taking these 9 steps, forget them. They're done. It's over with. You have accomplished something. You have gone through your phase of accepting and going into the program. Now you are an AA. You are a member. Until you do this, you are a member of something else. You have not become AA till you've done this. All right. Now what happens? You don't have to worry about those 9 steps anymore. We're making things real nice for us. We say, easy does it, here's the easy way. We only have 3 steps to concern ourselves with the rest of our lives. These are our living steps. These are the steps I call steps of construction. We have admission, submission, restitution, now construction. Here's where we construct our life. This life in AA is a life of continuous growth and development. So we take our step 10 here. It says we continue to take personal inventory. This is an everyday checkup on ourselves. Last thing, I do the last thing when I get in bed at night. I think about my day, my contacts with people, and what I've done, and who I've hurt, or who I've been pretty short with, and who perhaps I've done something for. And I think of how I could have done better. I wonder if I have any apologies to make, and I review my day last thing when I go to bed. I found it's a good thing for me. So it says here, we continue to take personal inventory. You check up on yourself. This is so important to an alcoholic. I'll tell you why this is so important. This 10th step is one of the most important steps in the whole thing. Because this thing of AA, this AA life, is a matter of standards and values. And we must maintain proper standards and proper values. And it's very easy to lose our standards and values and modify them. And this is why people get into trouble. A guy comes in here and he's broke, he's sick, he's friendless, such as I was when I came in, and such as many of you have been. Whipped, defeated, beaten. First thing that happens, all of a sudden people are paying attention to him. He's got friends. He gets a little jingle in the pocket. He gets a job. He takes on a new wife. He takes on this, takes on that. He gets rolling around and things start to happen to him so fast that he's very apt to change his values and his standards and put his reliance in these things that he's forgetting about that he did before. This is what we have to guard against. It isn't temptation for a drink that we have to guard against. When a guy's ready for this, he has no temptation to drink anymore. He's had it with booze. He wants something better. But these things that lead us into drinking is what we have to watch for. This is the idea of watching on our standards. This is why. So when we were wrong, we promptly admitted it. Holy smokes, when did we ever admit we were wrong? We never admit it's raining outside. It might involve us in something. But we're doing it here. Did you ever hear a guy in court? You ever go down to court? I know I don't suppose any of you have ever been in it. But it's your civic duty. You should go to court once in a while and see what those birds are doing down there. You're paying them for this, and you should see what they're doing with the taxpayers' money. You'll see some guy come up before the bar of justice. And he's been drunk, he's got in a fight, he's whipped some policemen, he's tipped over his automobile, he's gone through a storefront, everything's happened. And he stands there, they read the charge of DWI or whatever. The judge looks at him, he says, "You were drunk." Not me. "Well, you were drinking." Well, after some considerable wheedling, this guy will finally break down and admit to having a couple of beers. Here's a disaster out here. This is caused by a couple of beers. These guys that drink never cause any trouble. It's just these guys with a couple of beers. So we admit when we're wrong. We promptly admit it. This is something for us to do. It takes a big weight off of us. It does. It releases us. The 11th step. Here is a step we should consider most carefully, because here's the beginning of a prayer life for us who know very little about prayer, if anything. This is a beginning, I say. Remember this. This step starts us off. From here we can go any place with it. But this is our beginning. It says in this 11th step, we sought through prayer and meditation. What are we seeking through prayer and meditation? And what is prayer and meditation? Prayer is talking to God. Meditation is listening to Him. You have to listen, too. He's going to give you some answers. And if you don't listen with these ears, and with the ears in here, it's no use praying. We're seeking through talking and listening to God. What are we seeking? We sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God. And we're praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the power to carry that out. The good Lord told us that He'll never set on anything on us that He won't give us the power to execute. It's not the exact words, but that's what it means. So this 11th step is the beginning of our prayer life, which should be most meaningful and we should live by all of our lives. People come to me and say, when should a person do 12-step work? Well, let's listen and see what the 12th step says about this. It tells you very plainly in the program when you should do 12-step work. There's an awful lot of people running around doing what they call 12-step work that ought to be home in bed or locked up somewhere. They have no more bloody business out there chasing around doing this kind of thing than a man on the moon. Listen to what it says. This 12th step. It says, having had a spiritual experience as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to other alcoholics and to practice these principles in all of our affairs. So when do we go out and do 12-step work? When we have a message to carry. We have that message after we've taken these steps. Then we have some convictions. We have something to deliver. I say, if I have measles, I can give you measles. If I have chicken pox, I can give you chicken pox. If I have no measles, I can give you no measles. If I have no chicken pox, I cannot give you that either. If I don't have AA, I can't give that to you either. I realize that there have been drunks that have gone into bar rooms drunk and have talked about AA, and as a result, some guy sitting on the next stool has fallen off and gotten up and gone to AA and has recovered. This is one of these happy accidents. This is not the way the thing is designed to work. But a blind pig will find an acorn once in a while, you see. But there is a thing of being efficient in AA work and in this great work of ours and this carrying the message and of this living of this program. And it's a wonderful experience to make oneself efficient in it. Of course, the years have done something for me. I have a lot of experiences that a lot of you folks haven't yet had the opportunity of having. You will. I hope all of you will eventually. Last week I was down at Florida conference. I was the master of ceremonies at their banquet on Saturday night last week. And I had the privilege, this is the most rare privilege because it never happened before. I introduced a speaker. He's a fellow I sponsored in AA 26 years ago. Now, this fellow was in jail when he was attracted to me. The family was on relief. He had sold all the furniture. They were living on boxes. They had no rugs on the floors. I talked to this gal, this woman, his wife of his. I know it's a rummy deal. You can't mistake it. She reluctantly, after I told her about myself, she admitted he's in jail. Been drunk for 2 years. 3 kids. This fellow, since that time, all 3 of those kids have had college educations. They have kids of their own. This fellow has a $30,000 job, if you please, today. Sales manager of one of the largest dairies in Ohio. This is a fellow who was in jail and had been drunk in a bottle gang for 2 years. I have a lot of those stories I could tell you about the miracle of AA. I hope all of you experience some of these things. These are some of the side benefits the person gets. He goes and looks and sees some of these people and still knows them, still corresponds with them, still has fellowship and love with them. Where could a person ever do this but in our fellowship? Aren't we the most privileged of people? It has been so nice being here. I have enjoyed every minute of it. I've enjoyed talking to you, and I hope we all get together again, and may all of you go home and have a safe journey, and God bless all of you.